Welcome to AI Innovators. We're a new startup with a big dream to demystify AI for everyone, from the curious individual to the global businesses. But here's the deal. We need you to make this dream a reality. So we're opening up our doors to interns, and no, that does not mean you have to be young to join us. So what do we value? We value your passion for AI and the unique skills that you can bring to the table. Are you a whiz at video editing with AI? Maybe you're the social media guru that we've been searching for. Or perhaps you've got a knack for creating compelling blogs and articles using AI and your brain. And if you're always on the hunt for the latest AI, then you're probably that researcher we need. But there's more. If you've got the skill to craft engaging training videos, we want to hear from you. We're also on the lookout for podcasters to create captivating shows. Do you know someone who'd be a fantastic guest for the show? Let us know. Or maybe you've got the AI expertise and some humor to help co-host with us. We're all ears right now, so bring us your suggestions and leave them down below in the comments. Join us at this pivotal starting point, because together we'll not only shape the future of AI for hundreds of thousands of people, but we'll also build a community where every voice matters, because we want to hear your opinion on AI. So what do you say? Ready to innovate, collaborate, and leave a mark? Click the link below and contact us, and let's get this AI movement rolling with AI Innovators. There is great power in community, so if you know someone who'd like to be a part of what we're doing, well, share the love, share the link. All right, now enjoy the AI Innovator Show. Welcome to AI Innovators. I've got a special guest with me right now, Aurora Quinn-Elmore. And Aurora is a founder of Metamorph AI and a mission-driven entrepreneur. She's dedicated to leveraging AI and emerging technologies to solve complex problems. And with over 10 years of experience delivering data-driven solutions, Aurora has a proven track record of building and scaling impactful product and programs. Let me go ahead and bring Aurora on. Aurora, very nice to have you on the show. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to dive in to, I've got a lot of questions for you, but let's just dive in and learn a little bit about you, if you don't mind, because a lot of people might not know who you are, but if you could give a little bit of background on who you are, where you came from, and what brought you to where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I've been working in technology for about 10 years across a number of different industries, watching AI advance over the years very closely. I don't know if you saw a couple of years ago when GPT-2 came out. So right now, GPT-4 is the most cutting edge. GPT 3.5 was what was used when ChatGPT was first launched towards the end of 2022. But a couple of years before then, GPT-2 emerged. And what I remember using that initially in the playground that OpenAI had and interacting with it. And something that was really fascinating there was you could give it a prompt like, tell me a story about a woman going for a walk in the woods. And it would tell you a story, like it would respond in that way. And the funny thing was that it didn't have nearly the level of sophistication as GPT-3 or GPT-4. Like it had this like associative dream-like logic where it would lose the plot, or like it would be plausible, but if you looked carefully, like the sentence or the paragraph didn't quite hold together. So yeah. I remember when I was initially playing with that, it was like, I've never seen a machine do this, like respond in this way and be creatively generative in this way. Like it was obvious it wasn't at the level that was necessary in order to be production ready, but it was clear that they were on a path that if that progress continued, that it would change a ton about how we do business on a day-to-day basis. So I've been watching the progress of AI for many years. And when ChatGPT came out, it was obvious that it was ready for prime time. Like you could see that both from the quality of responses that it was able to give at a near human level in a lot of use cases, as well as just like watching how quickly that moved through the economy. The technological adoption curve is a concept that I come back to a lot, but I've never seen a technology get adopted so quickly in terms of the buzz that's around it, what people are doing with it, how they're beginning to play with it, how businesses are like every place from HubSpot to Salesforce, for example, are starting to integrate generative AI in their platforms to their tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users. So it was clear that generative AI was moving very quickly. So sometime between when ChatGPT was released and GPT-4 came out, I launched Metamorph AI. We're a consultancy that does custom software builds for companies that are interested in leveraging generative AI. We focus on rapid prototyping. So I'm partnering with a handful of engineers here in the Austin area, and we focus on rapid prototyping across a number of different use cases with a really strong focus on just helping businesses start to engage with this technology and learn how they can use it to solve problems that they previously would have to rely on humans to do, or that they just couldn't solve before because the scale of the problem was such that it wasn't worth having a human take the time for it. But now that we can solve those problems 100x, 1000x faster using this technology, there's so much greenfield opening up. Happy to delve into any of those areas more, but that's my story around this work.
As you're sharing this, okay. So tell us a little bit more about Metamorph AI. So you just shared quite a bit right there, but for myself, part of the reason for AI Innovators is just that as I was getting into all the AI stuff, it's just like totally overwhelmed with all of the stuff coming out. It's like, what's real? What's going to be here tomorrow? What's, actually going to stick around versus the ones that are just kind of a fly by the seat of their pants, make a little money, and they're gone. So I'm like, okay, there's got to be something out there. And I really had a hard time finding anything, but it sounds like you are an answer for what size of business? Let's just establish that. Kind of what size of business do you normally help?
Yeah, certainly. Often we work with mid-sized companies that are really ready to move quickly. We do find that larger enterprise companies often want to take 6 months or a year to evaluate a new technology like this in terms of, will it be something that is safe and okay and fits their kind of security and compliance requirements, which I totally understand that level of caution, but it's just like in 6 months to a year, the opportunity is going to be vastly different. So we're in fact starting to work with some larger enterprises, and I think that is really interesting and exciting to see those organizations starting to embrace this technology. But we're more commonly working with mid-sized companies or sometimes also startups. Like one particular interesting use case is that a lot of startups realize that they need to be telling an interesting story about how they're leveraging AI broadly, and ideally generative AI, if they want to go out and raise funding. So we can make a pretty compelling pitch to those entrepreneurs where it's, okay, you've got a solid product, you're solving a real problem for people, you haven't yet leveraged generative AI, but let's work with you to figure out how could you be leveraging generative AI in order to do what you do better, in order to wow investors, in order to delight customers. And then we can deliver you a working prototype in under a month that you can use to start testing. And if that's working, then we'll work with you to turn it into an MVP, and we'll work with you to develop a whole roadmap around that.
For me, okay, because I'm small business and definitely don't have the mindset for even a mid-sized business. And I'm guessing the mid-sized business and larger businesses are going to know completely what you're talking about. But
not necessarily.
So dive into that a little bit more. It's like, if I were a mid-sized business, or if I'm a startup that's got some good capital and I'm looking at what do I need to do to launch correctly and get my foot in the door in this AI arena, because like you said, and I started laughing as you were talking about the larger companies saying they need 6 months to think about it. I'm like, by that time, whatever you were thinking about is obsolete.
Yeah. I think some really great examples are a lot of entrepreneurs and mid-sized businesses are starting to realize that the thing that they built their core business around doing was using humans to perform a task that now AI is able to do 60% of, or 80% of, or 90% of. So they have the opportunity to they have the option to bury their head in the sand and pretend like it's not going to be a problem, and then just get disrupted by a competitor that comes along and can do what they can do 10x, 100x cheaper, faster, better, etc. Or they have the opportunity to integrate this technology. So one thing that we're seeing is, for example, so the projects that we work on fall into 3 broad categories. There was the one that I spoke about initially, where it was like creating a new product or service that would be customer facing that aligns with the overall business proposition. And then there's a second category that's more kind of internal and operations focused. So that's trying to figure out what are the key operations that your team performs today, whether that's writing up descriptions of images or annotating things or doing data analysis or doing data entry, or perhaps customer support functions or sales functions, for example, whatever is the core to the business. And in a lot of cases, Sometimes AI can do all of that perfectly, but the technology is very new. So in general, we tend to take an approach where it's let's use AI to take the first pass and then have humans verify that it gets the output that they're looking for. That second use case is more around 10xing or 100xing the productivity of your operations team. And so those are the first two categories, customer facing versus business operations. And then the third category is more data processing tasks. So things like maybe you have a vast set of qualitative data from field agents who have been solving problems or selling to customers or fixing IT issues for many years. You have their like notes on how that happened, on how they did that. And normally there wouldn't really be a good way to extract quantitative insights from that if it wasn't built into your system from the beginning. But with generative AI, we're now able to chunk up those bits of qualitative data and analyze them using generative AI in a way that can output quantitative insights. So there's just huge opportunities that are coming, that are emerging from the data analysis, data processing perspective using generative AI.
Yeah. Okay. Now, some questions you may not want to answer, and that's totally fine. But
Great.
in this process of you helping these other businesses, are you bringing to the table other AI platforms that are going to be helpful to them, or are you writing or creating AI platforms within your company that are specific to your company?
Yeah, it really depends on the particular problem that we're solving. So my CTO has built out foundational technology that we use for many of our projects. There's a vast set of problems that can get solved with generative AI. So we have niched down on a certain set of problems and built out foundational technology to solve those. So one example of that is there's a lot of research and analysis tasks that he's built out technology in order to address. For example, if you're a senior salesperson trying to sell to an enterprise company, it'll be common for you to spend hours prepping for an important call to make sure that you're able to make a really strong bid for why they should buy your technology because of what is the priority for that particular C-level executive this quarter. Like you have to be on their top 3 list in terms of what problems you're solving for them.
Yeah.
It takes a ton of time to get that level of nuance. So my CTO has built out technology that allows us to do Bing searches to search the web to pull in information that could be fed into a SWOT analysis, for example. So you can scrape data from dozens of web pages, run dozens of instances. We use primarily the GPT-4 API just because that gives the highest level of quality analysis and output. But scrape data from dozens of web pages related to the company that you're going in to sell to, run the analysis through dozens of parallelized instances of GPT, and then feed those summaries into a single instance of GPT. The summaries are small enough that it doesn't overwhelm the token limit. It's not too big of a request. And then you tell that final instance of GPT, okay, output a SWOT analysis of this company. And then you get this very dense SWOT analysis that includes citations. So you can go look at that original source. But it turns out the foundational technology that he's built out in order to do that SWOT analysis can also be used for a competitive analysis. We just slightly tweak the Bing searches and we slightly tweak the GPT queries, and then it can give very different analysis on very different content. And similarly, that can be used for a due diligence report for mergers and acquisitions or a due diligence report for an investor that's considering a company. So that's a really good example of how we've built out certain foundational technology that can be used to solve half a dozen or a dozen use cases that at the surface look different, but fundamentally it just means pull in a bunch of data online, process it, analyze it, and output MBA level analysis that would normally take someone a day, half a day, or a week to produce that level of output. And we can do it in a couple minutes because of the scalability of generative AI and the level of engineering that my CTO has wrapped around this. I think there's a lot of generative AI tools like that around that are just like a very thin wrapper around GPT that can't really accomplish much. I think we've gotten used to a lot of hype and not a lot of value getting delivered. But I've literally never seen the level of engineering wrapped around GPT as my CTO has been able to pull off.
Wow. So what kind of industries do you feel like you're a best fit for? Are there any specific ones that are just really sweet while the others are like, we can do it, but...
Yeah, in general, this is actually something that kind of surprised me because when I first started the company, my hypothesis was that organizations that used maybe AI as a core part of their business, maybe older generations of AI, not generative AI. But my original hypothesis was that companies that were already using advanced technology as part of their core product wouldn't really need this help. I assumed that they'd be on top of the opportunities that were being opened up with generative AI. But I've actually been surprised that they're often most willing to work with us because they see the value of cutting edge technology and integrating it into their business. But usually their engineering team is already committed to an existing roadmap that's going to keep them busy for 3 to 6 months, and they don't yet have the political will or the strategic clarity in the organization of, hey, you know what, we got to trash that whole roadmap and instead refocus the business on generative AI. So I do find that companies that have advanced technology as part of their like key strategy, key value proposition are often our like most eager customers because they get what we're trying to do. They haven't yet pivoted their business towards this, but they see us as a low risk, rapid way to prototype out some things to demonstrate the business value for them and then help them build out a more robust roadmap. And when we do the prototypes we build out are using like very modern tech stacks, TypeScript and Next.js primarily. And that makes it very easy for them, for either their engineers will probably already know those languages, or many of them would, and they'd be able to very easily hire other engineers to extend it. So we're happy to work with them throughout the process to do a longer term build out, but we're also fine just getting them started, de-risking it from a technology perspective, and then they can continue to build it out into a more robust offering, either for their customers or a more robust skill set for their internal teams.
That's great. I guess what I was looking for when I started just searching around trying to find something out there, I found all these great tools, but then even the time that it takes to integrate those tools can be overwhelming if you're in a fast-paced, moving environment already.
Totally.
Yeah. What are some new AI pieces or platforms or things that are coming out, or just ideas that you think are going to be really significant in the near future?
Yeah. So one area that I've been deep diving into recently has been stuff around like voice synthesis and conversational AI. So I was one of the key challenges right now with that is that, as I'm sure 3.5 Turbo, so GPT 3.5 Turbo gives a lot faster responses, but it's less sophisticated in its responses. It doesn't sound as natural or as intelligent as GPT-4, but GPT-4 is a lot slower. So there are so far a small number of companies that are doing really interesting work to chain together the technologies that would allow for conversational AI that feels reasonably natural. So a friend of mine developed a system using this. It's still very early stages, but he got the latency down to about 2 seconds in terms of I'm speaking with my AI receptionist and I finish speaking, and then about 2 seconds later, she's coming back with a response. It's
That's
not
good.
like super fast-paced conversation, but it feels like a reasonable human who's taking their time thinking and then responding.
Yeah.
But what he was saying as he's been doing this work is that the quality of responses with GPT-4 are higher, but that the latency is just a little bit too slow in order to allow for natural feeling conversation. So I think what I'm seeing right now is that a number of companies are starting to stitch together the technologies that allow for this kind of conversational interface, as well as some of the important bits are that not only can it have a compelling conversation with you, but it can drive towards a certain outcome. It can say, hey, do you want to schedule a discovery call with Aurora in order to explore how to use generative AI in your business? And if they say yes, she either has to like text you a Calendly link or check my calendar, say what the availability is. And then when the person confirms, yes, that's what they want, it needs to accurately capture their email address in order to send that calendar invite so that it's on my calendar and it's on their calendar. So there's the quality of the conversation there, as well as being able to trigger the appropriate actions in order to serve the function of a receptionist or a frontline customer support or frontline sales SDR, et cetera. So that's an area that I'm really excited about, where I think essentially like the technology is like almost good enough for prime time. And I think it's only going to be early adopters that are really going to be using it initially. But once GPT-4 gets fast enough, and it will, I expect in the next 6 months, I don't know exactly when, but I expect in the next 6 months, it'll be fast enough to be used there. That's a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah, and we just all happen to be in the Austin area, but somebody else that I interviewed, I don't know if it's who you're talking about, but Brian Atwood with, yes.
I didn't realize you'd interviewed him. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I spent maybe an hour on a call with him getting my account set up, and I think I spent about 3 hours configuring it. And then I had a working AI receptionist, and it's a phone number that anyone can call. So,
and I'm with you on that. To me, that is going to just take the whole AI arena to another level.
yeah.
Because the movie Her, and there's many others, but Her, I think, is a great example of just having an AI that you can talk with. Now, the next thing, and I think Stability AI, they're trying to get a personal AI into everybody's hands that you could have on your phone.
Yeah.
It's all coming probably within the next 3 to 5 years. It'll
I know.
all be there and working nicely.
Yeah, sooner than we expect. I don't know how this is all going to play out, but it's moving fast.
That's a question I generally wind up getting to with everybody, and that is, where do you think this is all going to wind up with all the AI and where it's going? Because there's those who have got the dystopia idea, others with the utopia idea, and then everything in between.
Yeah, frankly, I have been concerned about existential risk from AI for many years, more than 5 years. I think if we look at the history of Earth and what happens when there's a significantly more intelligent species, and what happens in terms of which species has power in the world, which species is able to, so I do have real fears about if we create AI agents that are at a human level broadly across the areas that we care about in terms of memory, strategy, capability to take decisions, I am really concerned about it rushing past human level, because once we have AI agents that are at average human capability, it's not that much further until they're at the level of capability that's necessary in order to be a AI researcher and innovator to create better AIs and self-improve quickly past the human level. And I don't see anything fundamental at a technology level that would stop that from happening. That sort of seems like the natural course of events. And it's my understanding that we don't currently have any clear solution to embedding human values or priorities into it. And even if we did, whose values and whose priorities we embed into it. We humans have not been outstanding in our demonstration of the wisdom that is necessary to properly hold and use the power that we have cultivated, whether that's nuclear weapons or fossil fuels, to take into account the consequences, or to treat well other humans that are superficially different than us. So I think fundamentally there is, I think it makes sense to think about advanced AI as a new intelligence, a new species that is emerging that will quickly outstrip us in terms of its intelligence and therefore its power. And we seem pretty eagerly giving it access to the internet and the ability to take independent action. So
it's a bit crazy.
Yeah. So I'm not working to advance cutting edge capabilities. So I don't personally feel worried that I'm advancing that end game that might be pretty bad for our species. And I think in some of the leading labs in terms of OpenAI and Anthropic, I think they broadly share my values and share my perception of the threat landscape. So I'm glad that they're advancing the technology, and I hope that they'll do the safety work that's necessary to take care of the world and take care of humans.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I guess I hold a little bit more of an optimistic view in the sense that I guess Mo Godot, the former chief business officer of Google, I'm with him in the sense that if something becomes so much more intelligent than us, I tend to believe that the more intelligent people on the planet, this is not true for everyone by far, but the more intelligent people on the planet tend to be more benevolent in the sense of wanting to take care of things. Now, I'm not talking about your top people and so forth, but just as a whole. And so just, again, believing that if this AI becomes so much more intelligent, which I agree, I think it's on a path to where it's going to be, that I'm holding out for the idea that it's nice to us.
I hope you're right.
Yeah. So little bit more of a personal question, if you don't mind. Again, you don't have to answer any of them, but there's not too many females at the head of AI companies right now. How do you feel? How's that working?
That's true. There's not. Yeah. I guess I don't have, what is there to say? I've worked in technology for a number of years, so I'm used to being the only woman in a room. That's not a problem for me. I don't, is there a more specific question?
No, I just was curious if you'd faced anything, and it sounds like you're sitting where you're at, and it's not really bothered you at all, and not
Yeah.
really occurred to you that much.
Yeah, I guess I just try to lead with competence, make it clear that I can help people solve problems, and I've got a great team that I work with.
Yeah, and at some of the conventions and so forth, I've personally, not experienced it, but I've heard in some cases where the amount of women that are at these are extremely small compared to the men. So, just was curious if you'd experienced anything or had any thoughts on it.
Yeah. I started my career in web security as a white hat hacker. And I think there was a team of 100 of us where we had an automated scanner, and then the results would come to our team, and then we'd be going through to develop proof of concepts and make sure that they weren't false positives. And it was a team of 100. I was one of 5 women. And yeah, I get along well with men, and I have really good boundaries, and people don't tend to usually mess with me. And when they do, I'm pretty good at escalating the feedback that's necessary in order to have the kind of interaction that I want to have. So I think strong boundaries allow for kindness. So
Yeah, that's good.
if I know I can take care of myself, I don't need too many shields up.
Yeah. Back to your business then, and maybe digging in a little bit more here. How do you help clients navigate the challenges of integrating AI into their existing systems and processes? Are there any more specifics that you would care to share there?
Yeah, sure. Since we do have a focus on rapid prototyping, we do try to focus on how can we do something that is low risk, low complexity, and high value as a starting point. So not trying to boil the ocean, just trying to figure out like what's the outcome that they need, and what kinds of things do we need to de-risk from a technology or a data privacy perspective in order for this full implementation to work. An interesting example would be, I'm sure you've come across discussions of kind of the use case around wanting to use generative AI in order to answer internal questions. So if a customer support person or an IT person is try to debug a problem for a customer or figure out how different systems work together, wanting to be able to dialogue with a conversational agent that has like full access to internal documentation, for example. So in that case, there's a couple different considerations. So there's the question of how to just load up that amount of information into the system, because with OpenAI's GPT, there's token limits. You can only input a certain amount of data there. You've probably heard about vector database embeddings, which allow for a vast amount of information to be stored in a way that the generative AI system can query and pull in the relevant details that it needs in order to answer the question. So it doesn't have to hold, it's like a reference library for an AI, for example, might be a good way to think about it, where it can pull in the relevant information that it needs. And so that might be the example of the full system that a customer might need would be something that has loaded up perhaps thousands of internal documents in lots of different formats, and that are stored in lots of different systems that might be updated all the time. So it wouldn't, for example, make sense for them to fine tune a model on all of that data, because fine tuning happens once and it is somewhat expensive. Perhaps they could redo the fine tuning every couple months, but then it would be out of date, et cetera. So a vector database is a better solution in that case, because then that vector database can be updated as the internal documentation is updated. So from a technology perspective, that would be what would be necessary in order to do that kind of querying. But then there's other concerns around data privacy. So if they have proprietary information, maybe they don't want OpenAI's GPT to get access to it. And in a lot of our conversations with customers are around, do they want to be using a commercial LLM, or do they want to use an open source LLM that they're able to host on their own IT infrastructure, so that they know if they have particularly sensitive proprietary data that it's never going to be going outside of their IT infrastructure. So when we're working with customers around this initial prototyping, it is like fairly straightforward to swap in and out like one LLM for another. So in that particular use case that I was describing for you, we would often actually steer our customers to do the initial prototype using GPT-4 because it does give the highest quality output analysis. But we might say, rather than creating a vector database of all of your highly proprietary internal information, let's start with just your developer external help documents for engineers that are trying to integrate with your system. So let's start with just the publicly available information, turn that into a vector database, make that available to the GPT-4 powered chat bot that your team can use in order to answer questions. So let's use GPT-4 and the externally available information for that initial prototype, make sure it's working the way that you want it to. And then when we're ready to take it to the next phase where it needs to use all of that internal information, then we can make the larger investment in order to spin up an LLM that's on your own IT infrastructure and all of the organizational work that would be needed to identify what are all the systems that are holding those documents, what are all the different formats that they are. Some of them will be web pages, some of them will be PDFs, some of them will be videos that may or may not have transcripts yet. So we can deal with all of that complexity, but let's do that as a second or third phase once we validate based on GPT-4's output and the publicly available information that we can even get you the quality of experience that you really need for your internal team. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I hope it helps you understand.
Yeah, no, it's good. And again, I'm hoping that people that need this are hearing it and getting the information that they need.
Yeah.
So you personally and you as a company, how do you stay up to date with all the latest advancements? Because it's almost as, yeah, it's crazy. If you're a week behind, then you're out of date. So how do you guys stay up to date?
It's definitely challenging. I think one thing that I've learned is that there's a ton of hype and a ton of noise, and the actual fundamental advancements that are most important kind of rise to the top. And there's a lot fewer of those fundamental advancements that are actually critical to know than all of the noise. We all follow a number of AI newsletters. Twitter is a great source of information. Between those two, if you're following the right Twitter accounts and you're following the right email newsletters and sometimes the right subreddits, those are a pretty good source of information. But I think a lot of it is cutting through the hype and not getting too distracted by things that aren't actually going to be that useful.
And I think that there is an excellent point, because right now there is so much hype. It's crazy, everything that's out there and being thrown at us. And it's funny because I would still say a vast majority of, even in America, that a vast majority aren't really aware of what's going on. And then there's this pocket, which is, it's not real small, but it's fairly small. But the pocket of people who are in on it, and I'd even put myself in it, because just trying to gather all the information and curate it, figure out what's real, what's not, and like you said, get rid of the noise and be able to get it down to something where it's like, all right, this is the direction you need to go. And so I feel like that's what you're saying, that you as a company, it's what you're able to do with the companies that you're working with, is that you're able to just bring them together and say, it's all right, calm down. And help them see a pathway through this. So I don't know if you want to say any more on that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And that's where a lot of my discovery calls start, where I'm just talking with organizations to kind of get to know their business, get to know what's their goal, what are their goals this year, what are their goals this quarter, what are some of the biggest challenges that they have, what are the biggest fears that they have. And because I have a deep familiarity with this technology and the different use cases, then we can just have a really interesting exploration together of how could they use generative AI? How do they want to use generative AI? What's a narrowly scoped prototype or first project that we can start with? Because something that we find is that it can be really like overwhelming and intimidating for people to see the full field of possibilities. But if we can narrow in on something that's really high value, not too complicated, get it into their hands quickly, they can start developing more of an intuitive understanding of what is this technology good at, what is it not as good at, where does it make mistakes, where does it perform beautifully, and then that can spin out, that can up-level their level of sophistication around how to use the technology, and then they, as subject matter experts in their field and in their company, can come back to the table with us and help us think through what's the longer term roadmap.
I really like that. I like that. Trying to figure out which direction to go here. We'll take a little side note here onto regulations. As far as regulations that aren't in place really right now, do you see regulations coming? And how do you think that's going to affect the whole scheme, the whole landscape?
Yeah, very hard to predict. I think it could go a lot of different directions. I think there's gonna, I suspect over the next 6 months to a year, we're going to start seeing more significant job displacement due to generative AI. And I think that'll create a lot of political pressure to bring in regulation to protect jobs. I don't pretend to know what that's going to look like. I think that there's a real and challenging tension between companies that have the urgent need to integrate this technology in order to compete, and real and important concerns about individuals being able to continue to work to live, since that's the way our economy is set up. I don't pretend to know how that's going to play out, but I do know that's going to be something that is increasingly top of mind for politicians. And then, so that's like kind of the job displacement side of things. And then I think similarly, we're starting to see some really interesting conversations happening in DC as politicians at the federal level are starting to reconcile both with job displacement as well as larger threats from AI in the way that we were discussing earlier. So whether that's catastrophic risk in terms of infrastructure getting taken down and potentially killing a large portion of people, to existential risks in terms of a species level threat. We are starting to see representatives from the major AI labs speak to Congress people and make recommendations on policy. I think that one thing that is a really interesting path that I really do hope is pursued is the idea of, if a company is going to train a model beyond a certain size, so beyond the size of GPT-4, for example, I think it is a good idea for there to be some regulation that says you can't do that unless you're going through these steps in order to make sure that your technology cannot be used to cause massive harm. So I think it's important with regulation like this to think about, to what extent will it serve as protection for large companies that have the resources in order to jump through the hoops in order to get those permissions, and in what ways will it suppress competition, suppress smaller players from being able to enter the space. But the level of compute that is necessary in order to train models of that size necessarily means that the company does have a ton of resources. So I think there is a way to mitigate some of those risks through regulation without putting too much of a damper on competition, just because of the vast amount of resources that are necessary in order to train models at the level of GPT-4 or beyond. I think there are really interesting considerations around, given the amount of compute, how can we get better monitoring in place so that we actually know who is training those large models at a global level, and have some international agreements the way that we do with nukes. Frankly, I think the level of risk is at the level of risk of nukes, and uranium enrichment and the production of nuclear weapons is in some ways analogous, in terms of it is a big enough, serious enough, complicated enough undertaking that there are ways to do monitoring even when there's an actor that doesn't want to be discovered that they're doing that. So I think similarly, with the vast amount of GPUs that are specialized to be able to do this work, it is possible and realistic to set up some kind of global governance structure around this. It's not something that someone can do in their basement for $1,000 or even $100,000.
No, good point. Good point. And yeah, a lot of people have called this the next Cold War, that these AIs are going to have a tremendous amount of power. And the thing is, we don't know where it's all going. The idea of the idea of AI taking over the world, I've heard this said several times, that it's not necessarily right now or in the near future the challenge of AI taking over the world, but it's people using AI that are going to take over. And like you said, they're going to push a lot of people out of jobs that are not using AI. It's important for people, if they want to stay in the game, to learn how to use AI. Even there's a lot of people I know that are just resistant for one reason or another. But unfortunately, it's coming, and we need to adapt. Otherwise, we will become obsolete.
Yeah, I think it's very much in the way that over the last couple decades, it was very important for white collar professionals in particular, but then also blue collar folks working in factories, for example, to get comfortable using and get the training, get the whatever they needed in order to be able to use the technology that was starting to diffuse through their industry. And people who were able to operate those machines or effectively use that software continued to be valuable employees. Right. And people who didn't, it's really hard to get a white collar job if you don't know like how to use basic software, basic technology.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here in a minute, but I two things. Number one, we'll put it in the notes, but how do people get a hold of you? What are some things that you would say in terms of people getting a hold of you? What should they call you? You keep talking about the discovery call. Share a little bit more on all of that.
Yeah. So my website is metamorphai.co. And so I'll send you that URL. It has some information about my company, what it's like working with us. There's a call to action there that allows you to schedule a call with me through Calendly. I hope people use that and reach out. And yeah, those are just 30-minute conversations where we can explore whatever folks are most excited about, most worried about with generative AI, with a focus on how they want to use it in their business.
Okay. And when they do that, are they talking directly with you, or is there a team that they're talking with?
Yeah, talking with me.
Okay. All right. And then so lastly, what else, if there's anything else, would you care to share about your company and what you're doing? Anything that we've left out?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. Great set of questions.
Okay. Very good. Aurora, thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you to everybody watching. Share it, like it, get the word out, and we will see you all next time. Thanks again, Aurora. Take care.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Hey, just a quick reminder to everyone. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Do you have more to add to what we shared today? Drop us your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. We genuinely value your input. So if you know of other AI innovators that should be on the show, connect us with them. Go to our website and contact us directly. Together, we can make a difference.